There is something profoundly disorienting about being entangled with an avoidant. On the surface, they appear calm, controlled, almost detached, as though they've discovered some secret strength in not needing too much, not reaching too far, not attaching too deeply. And if you've ever been on the receiving end of that distance, you know how seductive it can feel at first. The mystery, the restraint, the illusion of self-sufficiency. It can draw you in like a flame, convincing you that you are in the presence of someone who holds a kind of quiet wisdom about love. But what if I told you that much of what appears like strength is actually delusion? That what they call independence is often isolation, what they call boundaries is often fear, and what they call clarity is often denial. The avoidant mind builds a fortress and then mistakes the walls for freedom. They tell themselves they don't need connection, they convince themselves they're better off without vulnerability, and they cling to the fantasy that love will suffocate them rather than set them free. The tragedy, and here's where it cuts deep, is that they don't just sell this delusion to themselves, they sell it to you. They invite you to believe that their coldness is maturity, that their silence is depth, that their withdrawal is strength. And if you're empathetic, if you're patient, if you're a woman who has learned to give and to prove your worth through understanding, you might buy into it. You might start to contort yourself into believing that their lack of presence is actually a form of love. But inside that fortress, something else is happening. The avoidant is battling ghosts. Fears of engulfment, fears of betrayal, fears of being truly seen. And instead of facing them, they distort the entire landscape of love. They call closeness danger. They call intimacy too much. They call their own inability to connect a sign that you're asking for more than is reasonable. And slowly, if you're not awake to what's happening, you begin to question your own reality. This is the delusion. It's not simply that they deceive themselves. It's that they try to make you live inside their illusion too. The first delusion of the avoidant is this. They believe that detachment is safety. They carry this silent conviction that love is dangerous, that closeness will strip them of control, that intimacy will somehow erase who they are. And so they build their identity around withdrawal. They pride themselves on being low maintenance. They convince themselves they don't need much from a partner. They tell themselves and often tell you that space is the ultimate proof of balance. But step into the reality of that dynamic and you feel the lie instantly. Because what is safety if it leaves you constantly on edge? What is balance if it requires you to shrink your own needs down to nothing? If love cannot hold presence, warmth, and reliability, is it really safety, or is it just loneliness dressed up as control? Here's the truth. Detachment is not safety. Detachment is fear with a mask on. It's a coping strategy that got locked in long before they met you. Perhaps in childhood, when needing too much was punished. Perhaps in early love, when opening up meant betrayal. Somewhere along the line, closeness became coded as danger. And now, every time someone reaches for their hand, they instinctively pull it away, not because you are unsafe, but because their nervous system has been taught to confuse love with threat. And here's where the delusion deepens. They don't just fear closeness, they convince themselves that you are the one demanding too much. That your longing for affection, your need for reassurance, your desire for emotional reciprocity is excessive. Suddenly, what is normal and healthy in love becomes framed as clingy, dramatic, or too much. Do you see how upside down this is? They take their own inability to connect, and instead of naming it honestly, they project it onto you. Think about the moments when you've asked for something simple, a text back, a real conversation, a gesture of care. Notice how often those requests have been met with resistance, withdrawal, or even mockery. It's not that what you asked was unreasonable. It's that their internal world is calibrated to see intimacy itself as unreasonable. The most dangerous part of this delusion is how it seeps into you. Slowly, you start editing yourself. You hesitate before speaking your needs. You wonder if you're too much, if you're pushing, if you're wrong for wanting the very things that make a relationship real. And this is where their delusion becomes contagious. You begin to live inside their distorted reality, doubting what you know to be true about love. But what happens when you begin to see through it? What happens when you recognize that detachment is not strength? It is avoidance, that what they call independence is really isolation, that their fortress is not safety, but a prison. That's where the power begins to shift. Because once you see the delusion clearly, you can no longer be manipulated by it. You stop mistaking distance for strength. You stop shrinking your needs to fit their fears. You begin to realize that safety and love is not found in less, but in more. More honesty, more presence, more courage to stay. And once you glimpse that truth, the illusion starts to crack. The second delusion of the avoidant is subtler, but even more powerful. It's the belief that they are somehow above need, that their ability to stay distant, to remain unbothered, to not ask for too much makes them stronger, wiser, even more evolved than the rest of us. They carry themselves with this quiet air of superiority, as though emotions are a weakness they've outgrown, as though longing itself is a flaw that others are still enslaved to. But pause and feel the reality of that. Is the absence of hunger the same as fulfillment? Is numbing yourself really proof that you're enlightened? Or is it proof that you've shut down parts of your humanity so deeply that you mistake emptiness for strength? Avoidants often create this illusion of being above it all. They roll their eyes at what they call drama. They smirk at love songs. They look at couples who crave closeness and label them codependent. And here's the sharp twist. While they're busy disowning their own vulnerability, they make you feel childish for embracing yours. You end up questioning your own instincts for love, while they stand on the shaky pedestal of false self-sufficiency. And yet, beneath the mask, there's a gnawing hollowness. They still long, they still ache, they still feel the pang of loneliness in the quiet hours when no one is looking. But to admit that would shatter the image they've built of themselves, the image of being untouchable, unmoved, above need. And so they bury it, they repress it, they hide it, even from themselves. Have you ever seen it slip through? Maybe in a fleeting moment of tenderness, a sudden intensity, or a night when the armor cracked just enough for you to see the human being underneath. And then, almost as soon as it appeared, it was gone. The next day, they were distant again, insisting that nothing happened. That's the cycle of their delusion. A moment of truth instantly erased by denial. But here's where you need to step into your clarity. Their inability to need does not make them stronger. It makes them smaller. Because love is not about proving you can live without someone. Love is about having the courage to live with someone, fully exposed, with all your flaws and hungers and soft places in the light. And when you stand in that truth, something shifts. You stop envying their detachment. You stop making their coldness a standard you should match. You stop mistaking suppression for strength, because now you see it clearly. They are not above need. They are imprisoned by their inability to admit it. And this is the moment where you start to take your power back, not by shaming them, not by fixing them, but by refusing to bow down to the pedestal of false superiority they've built. You are not weaker for wanting connection. You are not lesser for needing closeness. You are more whole, more human, more free. If this is landing for you, subscribe. We're just getting started. The third delusion of the avoidant is perhaps the most damaging. They don't just fear intimacy, they redefine love itself as a game of control. Instead of seeing it as a space where two people meet in truth, They quietly believe that love is a trap, and the only way to survive it is to stay one step ahead, to hold the power, to never let themselves be the one who cares more. This is why the dance with them feels so exhausting. Every time you move closer, they pull away. Every time you reach out, they retreat. And the more you try to reassure them, the more they test the limits of how much you'll bend. Because in their world, love is not about connection, it's about survival. It's about not losing. It's about not being the vulnerable one. And here's the cruel irony. They convince themselves that this guardedness is wisdom, when in truth it's sabotage. Love cannot thrive where there is constant calculation. You cannot build trust when every tender moment is weighed against a hidden fear of losing control. Imagine planting a seed in soil that keeps being dug up and covered again, dug up and covered again. It never grows roots. That is what it feels like to love someone who treats intimacy as a power game. Have you noticed how often the rules keep shifting? One day they let you close. The next they shut down without explanation. One week they text you with warmth. The next they disappear into silence. These push-pull patterns aren't random. They are the avoidance way of managing closeness. If they feel you're too near, they create distance. If they feel you drifting, they throw you crumbs to pull you back. It's not love in its pure form. It's love filtered through fear. And slowly you start playing along without realizing it. You measure your words, you tiptoe around your needs. You wait anxiously for their next move, like a gambler watching the dice roll, hoping this time it will land on connection. This is how you lose yourself inside their delusion, believing that if you can just play the game better, you'll finally win their love. But let me ask you this. What if love is not meant to be won? What if the very idea of winning and losing has no place in intimacy? What if love, real love, is the absence of games, the absence of scorekeeping, the absence of needing to guard your heart against the very person who is supposed to hold it? When you realize this, the entire game collapses. You see that their control is not power, it is fear. You see that their distance is not strength, it is avoidance. You see that their push-pull is not mystery, it is manipulation rooted in panic. And most importantly, you see that you are not meant to live inside that game at all. Because love, the kind that nourishes, the kind that endures, is not about who holds the upper hand. It's about who dares to open both hands and hold the other without fear. The fourth delusion of the avoidant is perhaps the most cunning. They cloak their fear as logic. They don't just withdraw, they rationalize it. They don't just resist intimacy, they dress it up as common sense. They'll tell you they're just being realistic, that relationships always fade, that expectations ruin love. And if you've ever stood in front of them with an open heart, you know how destabilizing it can feel to have your deepest longings dismissed as if they were irrational fantasies. It sounds so reasonable when they say it. Who can argue with "I just need space"? Who can refute "I don't want to rush things"? These phrases land softly, almost innocently, but underneath them is a strategy of avoidance, a way of justifying distance without ever confronting the fear behind it. And here's the danger, because it sounds rational, you start questioning yourself instead of the dynamic. You wonder if maybe you are moving too fast? Maybe you do expect too much? Maybe you should learn to be more independent, more detached, more like them. Slowly you compromise. You dim your needs. You let their version of logic override your intuition. And before you know it, you're living in a reality where connection feels unreasonable and withholding feels noble. But let's strip it down. Is it really logical to invest in a relationship without presence? Is it really rational to want love while rejecting the very intimacy that makes it real? There's nothing reasonable about starving what you claim to value. There's nothing wise about calling distance strength, while secretly craving closeness you refuse to admit. What you're witnessing is not logic. It's fear in disguise. fear of vulnerability, fear of being known, fear of depending on someone and discovering that the ground might give way beneath them. And instead of owning that fear, they wrap it in polished words and present it as clarity. That is the delusion. And the effect on you? It's gaslighting at a soul level. You start to believe that your most natural instincts to connect, to bond, to build are somehow irrational. You start to mistrust your own heart. That is the deepest cost of their delusion. Not just that they deceive themselves, but that they train you to doubt what you already know about love. Here's where the breakthrough comes, when you begin to reclaim your own inner clarity. When you say, no, closeness is not unreasonable. Connection is not too much. My heart is not wrong for wanting what is human. When you stand in that truth, the spell breaks. Their polished arguments stop making sense. Their detached logic stops holding power. And you realize that their so-called reason is just a mask for fear. And once you see fear for what it is, you can no longer bow to it. Send this to someone who's been stuck in this dynamic for far too long. The fifth delusion of the avoidant is their rewriting of abandonment into inevitability. They tell themselves, and they often tell you, that leaving, pulling away, or detaching is simply who they are, that it's just how they're wired, that their love comes with limits you should have known from the beginning. They normalize the cycle, closeness followed by distance, intimacy followed by silence, commitment followed by retreat, as though it were a law of nature rather than a wound being replayed. And here's where it stings. When you're inside that cycle, you start to believe them. You tell yourself, this is just what it's like to love them. This is the cost of being with someone like this. And in that moment, their delusion becomes yours. Because abandonment dressed as inevitability isn't truth. It's a pattern. And patterns can be named, exposed, and broken. Think about the aftermath of one of their disappearances. The way they slip away when intimacy grows too real. The way they retreat without warning, leaving you spinning in confusion. And then when they return, they often minimize it. They may act as though nothing happened. Or worse, they frame it as a necessary reset, a sign of how they maintain balance. But if you look closer, you'll see it's not balance at all. It's fear running the show. It's their inability to stay present with love once it starts demanding the kind of vulnerability they've spent a lifetime avoiding. And yet the avoidant convinces themselves that this cycle is inevitable, even healthy. They believe their own story, that they're protecting themselves, that they're protecting you, that this is simply how love works for them. But scratch beneath that surface, and what you find is a terrified child frozen in the same old wound. If I stay, I'll lose myself. If I open, I'll be hurt. If I love, I'll be abandoned. And so they preemptively abandon again and again, calling it truth when it is only repetition. And the impact on you? You start living in anticipation of the drop. You begin bracing yourself for the silence before it even comes. You adjust your heart to expect absence instead of presence. This is how you become trapped in their delusion, internalizing the belief that abandonment is normal, that love always comes with loss. But what if it isn't inevitable? What if love doesn't have to be a cycle of rupture and retreat? What if the constancy you crave is not fantasy, but reality, just not with someone who is still worshiping their fear? The power comes when you stop accepting their pattern as a law, when you stop confusing their wound with truth, when you stand in the knowing that love is meant to expand, not collapse. That presence is the standard, not absence. That staying is the proof of love, not leaving. And when you anchor yourself in that truth, you no longer bend to their inevitability. You see their cycle for what it is, not destiny, not truth. Just fear replaying itself again and again. And the moment you stop buying into it, the cycle no longer has power over you. The sixth and most devastating delusion of the avoidant is this. They believe their distance is protection. They tell themselves that pulling away keeps them safe, that closing off preserves their identity, that staying guarded shields them from pain. But in reality, every act of withdrawal is not protection. It is destruction. Not of you alone, but of the very bond they secretly long for and cannot admit they crave. Because here's the truth. They can't escape avoidance, want love just as much as anyone else. They ache for it in the hidden corners of their hearts, in the quiet moments when no one is watching. They dream of closeness, of being seen, of being held without fear. And yet, in the moment that love actually shows up, they sabotage it, they run from it, they tear it apart with silence, with distance, with walls so thick no tenderness can survive. It is the ultimate paradox, craving the very thing you spend your life rejecting, wanting closeness while mistaking closeness for danger, needing connection while convincing yourself that connection will undo you. This is the core of their delusion that self-protection means keeping love at arm's length, when in truth it guarantees the very outcome they fear most: loneliness, emptiness, the slow starvation of the soul. And the cost isn't only theirs. You, the partner who steps into that space, you feel it all. You feel the weight of their silence, the ache of their absence, the sting of their walls. You hold the contradiction of knowing they care, yet watching them push you away. And if you're not careful, you begin to internalize it. You begin to believe that maybe love is supposed to feel this way, that maybe closeness is always fleeting, that maybe you're asking too much, that maybe your longing itself is the problem. But let me be clear, your longing is not the problem. Your humanity is not the problem. Their fear is the problem. Their delusion is the problem. Because in trying to protect themselves from pain, they create the very pain they were desperate to avoid. In rejecting closeness, they create abandonment. In withholding love, they ensure loss. In silencing themselves, they guarantee the emptiness they were trying to escape. And once you see this, once you truly see it, the power shifts. Because now you understand that you were never too much. You were never asking for the impossible. You were simply standing in front of someone at war with themselves, someone whose fear rewrote reality, someone who mistook destruction for protection. And that's the final liberating truth. You cannot save them from that war, but you can refuse to live inside it. You can choose not to inherit their delusion. You can stand in your clarity, your wholeness, your knowing that love is not meant to be feared, but lived. And when you stand there, fully awake, fully unashamed of your needs, their fortress no longer looks like strength. It looks like what it always was, a cage. And you are free to walk out of it. So here you are, standing at the edge of all these truths. You've seen the delusion for what it is. That detachment is not safety. That superiority is not strength. That control is not love. That logic without vulnerability is only fear in disguise. That cycles of abandonment are not destiny, and that what they call protection is in fact destruction. And if you've been in this dynamic, you know how heavy it can be. You know the ache of second-guessing yourself, of trying to fit your heart into someone else's fortress. You know the exhaustion of loving someone who runs from the very thing they crave. And maybe, just maybe, you've felt the slow erosion of your own truth, the way their delusion seeps into you, convincing you that love should cost your needs, your voice, your wholeness. But now you see that the fortress they built is not wisdom, it's fear. You see that their game of distance and control is not mystery, it's avoidance. You see that their so-called logic is a mask. Their cycles are a wound. Their protection is destruction. And once you see this clearly, you cannot go back. The spell is broken. And here's the freedom. You don't need to hate them. You don't need to fix them. You don't need to prove yourself to them. You only need to decide that their delusion will not become your reality, that you will not shrink your hunger for closeness, your longing for intimacy, your need for love that stays, just to fit inside their fear. Because love, real love, is not about who can need less. It's about who can dare to need fully, openly, courageously, without shame. Love is not about holding power. It's about holding presence. Love is not about protecting yourself from hurt at all costs. It's about choosing courage even in the face of risk, because the reward of true intimacy is worth it. So let me leave you with this question. What standard will you choose for love? Will you live inside someone else's delusion, or will you claim your own clarity that love in its truest form is expansive, nourishing, and brave? If you know deep down that you are ready to stop living inside the avoidant illusion, then this is your turning point. Step into your power. Step into your truth. And if this resonated with you, subscribe not because you need more content, but because you've already started a journey of awakening, and you deserve to walk it with strength, with clarity, and with love that does not hide.